Hi friends, I'm Scott Giles, a certified consulting hypnotist and a life coach. And every Saturday afternoon at 2:30 Central Time, I make a short 5 or 10-minute video on some aspect of coaching or the hypnotic arts and sciences. Today, I want to talk about the technique of hypnotic regression. Now, this is a technique that many hypnotists love. One of my buddies in New Jersey actually says that he does a regression for if someone wants help with a hangnail. It's often the favored go-to technique of a lot of hypnotists. I think the reason for this is that a lot of us are conditioned to think about the unconscious mind in terms of Freudian psychoanalysis, where all present-day problems actually are rooted in something that happened in the past. Hypnotic regression is an imaginative review of past events with the hypnotist serving as a guide. That is the official National Guild of Hypnotists definition. The techniques that are used are quite varied. It could be take a hypnotized person back through time by imagining calendar pages flipping. That's a common metaphor. There's another technique called the affect bridge. My buddy Cal Banyan calls this the time tunnel, where you evoke a particular emotional state that the client or subject is having, and then regress them to past times when they felt that exact same emotional state. A very effective technique and one of the best ways to do hypnotic regression. But there are other ways too. There's the timeline, for example. Because the human brain is a three-dimensional organ, it doesn't have a way of representing the fourth dimension, which is time. So it constructs a subconscious spatial metaphor. If you ask people to close their eyes and imagine what direction the past is in, they'll point in a certain direction, maybe behind them, maybe to the right, the way they read, or the left, whatever it is. And everyone's got it a little bit different. If you do this in a group, then have everyone open their eyes, they're all pointing in different directions. But if you know what a person's timeline is, you can hypnotize them, float them above the timeline in some sort of a protective bubble, and then move them back along the timeline in the direction of the past, and they will be able to look through the bubble and actually see things that happened to them at a previous time to the degree that they remember them. Now, regressions are done for forensic purposes, for use in courts to revivify the memory of a willing witness. They can be used to revivify any memory, or they can actually take you back to the person you were at a previous time. The difficulty is that memory is constructive. We don't actually remember everything that happened. We kind of have a general outline, and we fill the details in from our present experience or what we have in short or long-term memory. So in the case of forensic hypnosis, when we have someone who witnessed a hit and run accident and you regress them and they get the license number of the car on that hit the pedestrian or whatever it was, then you run that license plate number and you find out it's their grandmother's license plate number because they always knew she was the kind of person who would do something like that. And that's the danger of regression. The details can't always be trusted. Now, when I do a hypnotic regression, I have a particular way of doing it. I like using the Chevreul pendulum, or just a string or a chain with a little weight on it, and it can move back and forth or forward and back to indicate yes or no, or circles, or whatever you set up with the client. And so I'll sometimes regress a client, ask him to hold the pendulum, and tell me, well, did the incident we're looking for happen between the ages of 0 and 3, 3 and 5, 5 and 10? And by playing 20 questions with the pendulum, sometimes the client's unconscious mind will give me an indication as to where on the timeline we need to be focused. And this does work. However, there are concerns with any use of hypnotic regression. And in fact, I don't use it a lot. I do use it, but I don't use it a lot because a lot of my work is done in the hospital setting. I'm a medical hypnotist, and medical hypnotism is scientifically based hypnosis done for reasons of health and well-being. And here in the greater Chicago area, we had back in the 80s and 90s a terrible scandal where a group of psychiatrists and psychologists used hypnotic regression to create a whole bunch of false memories, convincing people that they had been abused by a cult when they hadn't been. A huge malpractice settlement was made. And as a result, when I brought my cancer clinics into the various hospitals where they're based here in Chicago, my contract specifically says I may not use regression or uncovering techniques on hospital property. So I've developed other techniques that produce the same result, but don't involve the danger of accidentally creating a false memory. And false memory is the problem with regression. When you have a person who has been taken back to an earlier time in their imagination, if you ask leading questions, you can get almost any response. I don't teach basic hypnosis anymore, but when I did, I would often demonstrate the danger of this to the class by having a volunteer talk to me, and I would, using purely conversation, no trance, purely conversation, create a false memory in that person. Typically the memory of being harassed by a clown wearing green makeup at an earlier time at a circus that the client had never attended, never happened. It was complete fabrication. But just by asking leading questions and using vivid imagery, it's possible to create a false memory that feels real to the person, but is in fact a complete fabrication. And if you do this with hypnosis, you can get a person to believe almost anything happened to them in the past. So that's the concern. Another concern with regression is that it is a very powerful technique. When it's done properly, it can allow the unconscious mind of the subject to reframe, to get a whole new understanding of something that happened in the past. I had a client years ago that thought she had been sexually abused by her father. And talking to her, she had every one of the boxes checked on the checklist of look for a sexual abuse survivor. When we actually did the regression, though, what had actually happened was completely different. She had climbed into bed with her father, who she loved, on a morning. The father, half asleep, was having a morning erection, which a lot of men get because hormone flows tend to be higher in a man in the morning. She straddled him, trying to wake him up, and in the process created enough friction that he orgasmed. So she had the experience of the feeling of his ejaculate, the aroma, and when he realized what had happened, he pushed her off, ran into the bathroom to clean himself up, and was distant from her from that day on because he had been horrified by what had happened. And in her unconscious mind, that was remembered as a rape, but it wasn't. And only regression brought the memory forward to the point where she could understand it in a new way and allow healing of that incident. So that's hugely, hugely popular and very powerful. Now, another use of regression is often called prenatal hypnotic regression or past lives. I often get people asking me if I would hypnotize them to remember a past life. And I typically would rather refer them to someone who has past lives as a part of their belief system because it's not part of mine. But it's not hard to do this form of hypnosis. It's just a regression. You take them back, though, before birth. You'll get something. The issue is, what do you make of what you get? Is it actually a memory of a previous life, or is it simply an imaginative fantasy created by the social interaction of the hypnotist and subject in that environment. And what you believe about past lives determines how you interpret what you get. Now, what you get's going to be interesting because it's coming out of your client, but whether or not it has actual ontological validity, that's a matter of opinion, and we can't resolve that one. Also, another thing about past lives, because as I said, I don't really buy into that hypothesis. Everyone was either Cleopatra or died on the Titanic. No one was the wife of the secondary understudy of the person who made sewers in Japan. No one ever is pedestrian. It's always these dramatic cases. So you have to kind of wonder. So that's hypnotic memory. The danger, false memory. Sorry, hypnotic regression. The danger is false memory. The danger is understanding the regression as being more than it is. It is simply a constructive recollection, which may or may not be factual. It may be useful to the client if the reframe is successful, but you don't know if that's what actually happened. A final concern. When I was in training so many years ago, I was training with a psychiatrist who was something of a cowboy. And we were all practitioners of some healing profession. And there were about 25 of us in the room. And he got a volunteer who was willing to be regressed and put him in the center of the room, did no pre-talk, did no conversation to find out if this person had issues, and regressed him to a traumatic event in front of the whole class. Well, this guy turned out to be a Vietnam War vet. And what he regressed to was the memory of watching 3 of his friends burned alive in a Jeep in Vietnam. He was terrified. He lost control of himself. He lost control of his bladder and his sphincter, and he soiled himself right in the chair in front of 25 colleagues. So he hadn't been helped. He had been re-traumatized. So from that experience going forward, I've got a lot of respect for the power of hypnotic regression. It's useful, as in the case I talked about with my female client. It's also perilous. So you have to use it with great care. If you decide to subject yourself to a hypnotic regression, that's fine. But be sure you check your hypnotist out. This is not something you want to go to a beginner for. You want to go to someone who really knows what they're doing and will take sufficient precautions to protect you and keep you safe. Hey, thank you very much for your attention today. I will be back 2:30 Central Time next week with another video, and there I'll be talking about the danger of giving hugs. It's probably not what you're going to imagine, so tune in if you're curious. I will edit this and put it up on my YouTube channel. I'll link it to Facebook, and I'll probably also down below link to another video I did about the satanic panic, which talks more about the false memory phenomena. So I hope you'll give it a look, and I hope you appreciate it. Thank you again for your attention. If I can be of help to you, hey, reach out to me. I would be happy to talk to you about how hypnotism or coaching can help you become a better version of yourself, help you deal with a scary medical diagnosis or any of the other things that I do. Take care and be well.